seconds, we just discussed that the sensory information arrives at the back of your head. At about 200 milliseconds, it arrives in the front of your head. When it hit the back of your head, you had a perceptual detection, but you didn't know what it was you perceived. At 200 milliseconds, when it hits the frontal lobe, this corresponds with awareness. You're aware that you perceived something, but you don't know what it was, because you still can't differentiate that perception from another perception. It takes another 100 milliseconds for that to occur. And phase lock gamma activity actually bursts in the brain in this time frame between 180 and about 230 milliseconds. But only in a cognitive task. It doesn't just pop any old time. It only happens when there's a relevant task. And this phase lock gamma ends up being seen over the posterior temporal cortex with respect to the frontal areas as well, again, at about 200 milliseconds. And you'll see that all of these statements have references. And if anyone wants the PowerPoint presentation, email me and I'll be more than happy to send it to you. And it's got 2 pages of references in fairly small font at the end. Don't try and copy them down. The P300 is the 300 millisecond occurrence back in the back of the head. So 100 milliseconds is perception, 200 milliseconds is awareness, 300 milliseconds is now the ability to differentiate 2 stimuli, one from the other. But you're still not consciously aware of what it is. You've now differentiated it. We can get P300s out of coma patients. And I work with a very large group called the International Brain Research Foundation. We do coma recovery work and just did a very nice study. We woke up 27 out of 33 people that were in coma. But to get into the study, they had to be in a coma for over a year with a Glasgow coma scale of less than 8, which basically means bye-bye. It's a grave prognosis, as they say in medicine. The next stop is going to be in the grave. But this group basically woke up very effectively using our approach. So we're well aware that you can get these wave shapes out of people that are in a coma. It's a good prognosis if you see it. If you don't see this response in a coma, it's not a bad prognosis. But seeing it is a very good sign. So this 100, 200, 300 millisecond cycle of perception is only really one frame in the construction of a conscious awareness perception. Again, by 300 milliseconds you're differentiating, but you're not consciously aware because you haven't got what it takes to have consciousness yet. Basically, we identified in neurology that if you pair 2 stimuli, when the second pair of the stimuli ends up differing, you can end up seeing an enhancement of the event-related potential. And this is called a mismatch negativity for you, any of you who are looking to the literature. But it's a linearly related to attention. Let's take a quick look at some data. What we have here is a normal person, a high-functioning, middle-functioning, and low-functioning ADD case. And what we have here is a go, no-go test where they receive paired stimuli and with one stimulus priming and the second stimulus. And during that paradigm, when they receive a stimulus that tells them they shouldn't respond, you get a different wave shape than when they receive a stimulus that indicates they should respond. The difference between those two is linearly related to your attentional skills. You can see that they use the same basic neural network. It's not that ADD is using the temporal lobe instead of the frontal lobe to try and regulate attention. But literally the difference between the green wave and the red wave here, the green is go, the red is stop, standard color conventions. And the little black line here ends up being the difference wave. And the difference wave here ends up dropping and dropping and dropping. So mismatch negativity is a linearly related phenomenon to attention. And here the ADD people were classified as high, middle, and low ADD based on their continuous performance test results, not based on somebody's subjective assessment of their work or parent report or something like that. essentially, I mentioned this already, you generate the ERP morphology by phase locking theta and alpha. And this time series represents the interaction between episodic memory and semantic memory. In a conscious person, you compare your recent past experience continuously with your current perception. And your first event-related potential lays down a memory trace that your next perception then compares it against. And unless you have this first memory trace to compare your ongoing perception with, you don't have conscious awareness. Literally, consciousness, according to Edelman in 2001, is the remembered present. Now, if your semantic non sequitur detector went off based on that tense shift, perhaps it's an indication that consciousness exists at 9:40 in the morning here. So, but the implication here is that consciousness literally takes two cycles, one to lay down a memory trace and the other one to compare against it. Until you have that double cycle, you don't have conscious awareness. The second cycle, these are essentially 300 millisecond cycles, but conscious awareness in Libet's work out of San Francisco in 1979 indicated that conscious awareness takes about 500 milliseconds. Now, if you do the math in your head, you'll say, well, Jay, goodness, 300 plus 300 is 600, not 500. Your theory can't possibly be correct. It's 100 milliseconds off. Well, not exactly. Remember, the first time it got to the frontal lobe was awareness. The second time it gets to the frontal lobe is conscious awareness. And it only takes 200 milliseconds to get to the frontal lobe. So the first cycle took 300 milliseconds to lay down the memory substrate. The second cycle only took 200 milliseconds to get to the frontal lobe, and that's when conscious awareness occurs. So the math even works out very nicely. And when the math works, you got to wonder, you know. Basically, this suggests that we